From a quiet ocean that felt predictable to a moment that was so sharp it sliced the silence in half. August 2025 was supposed to be just another day for the Ford Carrier Strike Group. 40 years of guarding the North Atlantic had turned the job into background noise until a single circling aircraft picked up something faint, something quiet, something that snapped the entire fleet awake. And that's where everything spiraled into the kind of chaos no one planned for. Unknown to the Americans, the Russians had just received the kind of order that means get close, get everything, and pray. But Moscow was about to learn why challenging the US Navy is like stepping into traffic because you think the car will stop. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched submarine tracks gliding across the screens with the confidence of someone guarded by 4 Arleigh Burke destroyers armed enough to turn any enemy sub into a coral decoration.
172.
Exercise. We have indications and warnings of an active CDC.
The Russians were closing fast. At their speed, they'd hit torpedo range in 47 minutes. If they fired, their torpedoes would only need 6 minutes to close the distance. But the Ford's escorts had ASROCs, anti-submarine rockets, that could reach the Russians in 90 seconds. The admiral wanted to know their intent. The reply was simple. In 40 minutes, those subs would be close enough to gather intelligence. The recommendation was to go to general quarters. The admiral? He just shrugged. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. And that's when the Atlantic flipped from peaceful blue to battlefield red. Too bad for them. Within seconds, Link 16 transmitted the submarine information across every NATO asset, as if someone had hit the emergency button. A British Type 23 frigate sprinted south. 8 P-8 Poseidons launched instantly. A Virginia-class submarine that had been shadowing the Russians for days finally got permission to say hello. Not loudly, just enough to let them feel the pressure. At 15:15, the Russians tried a deception that probably sounded smart in the briefing room. One sub went up to 200 meters, making noise. The other 2 sank deeper and tried to sneak in quietly. Classic World War II Wolfpack vibes. Except this wasn't 1943, and NATO's acoustic processors had no trouble telling the difference between a decoy and 2 subs that sounded like a shopping cart with a broken wheel. The Russians thought they were slick. They weren't. Their mission was simple: record the Ford's acoustic signature, map escort positions, capture radar patterns, and basically take notes for a possible future war. The problem was that they didn't get the memo that NATO was already sprinting toward them like a pack of Karens heading toward a manager. By 0200 hours, a P-8 arrived overhead, and the Russians were about to learn what hammering means when NATO does it. These planes used to carry tourists to Florida. Now they're $130 million submarine hunters that can hear a shrimp sneeze half a kilometer down. They dropped sonobuoys in a boxing pattern, little underwater microphones that cost more than what most Russians make in a year. Those buoys started blasting sonar at 140 decibels, louder than a gunshot, and inside the Russian sub, it felt as if someone turned the whole boat into a giant ringing bell. Meanwhile, the P-8 crews were chill, fresh rotations, real food, actual bathrooms, basically doing anti-sub warfare from a flying WeWork. The Russians, stuck in a metal tube with the vibe of a Spirit Airlines middle seat. Then the Arleigh Burkes joined in, firing up their massive sonar arrays. These things pump out so much energy that fish near the ship literally get stunned. The Russians weren't being hunted at this point, they were getting blasted by the ocean itself. P-8s even dove from high altitude, pretending to drop weapons. The Russians had to react every time. Emergency dive, hard rudder, blow ballast, over and over again. Imagine someone fake slapping your hands 50 times. You flinch every single time. The Russians tried sprinting at 30 knots, pushing their reactors hard enough to make them sound like a washing machine full of hammers. But the real reason they kept suffering was simple. They wanted radar fingerprints, launch patterns, escort communication habits, blueprints for how to kill a U.S. carrier someday. Except NATO wasn't about to let them finish that assignment. And now here's where it gets wild, because what NATO learned from this encounter changed everything. Before we get into that, make sure to like, subscribe, and join the squad, because what comes next puts every future naval encounter on a knife's edge. They launched decoys. NATO computers laughed and ignored them. It was like someone trying to escape the police by throwing a mannequin out the window while the cops have helicopters, satellites, and your license plate. As the hours passed, NATO turned the sea into a full-blown EDM festival. British ships dragged long-towed sonar arrays. MH-60R helicopters hovered above, dropping their own dipping sonar like underwater fishing lines. The Russians tried using thermal layers to hide, but the dipping sonar cuts right through them as if they're not even there. Coordinating all this was insane. P-8s from 20K to 25K feet, helicopters below 500 feet, horizontal separation, assigned radio channels, patrol boxes like parking spots, an airborne controller juggling multiple nations at once. Meanwhile, the Data Fusion Center in Northwood stitched everything together into a real-time 3D battlefield map that looked like a video game. Except this wasn't Fortnite, this was the real thing. Helicopters hovered right over the Russian subs and started pinging. The destroyers dragged their own arrays. The Russians soon had more sonar contacts on their screens than a Kardashian has notifications. This wasn't hunting anymore, it was humiliation. And through all of this, remember that Virginia-class submarine? It trailed the Russians perfectly for 48 hours, quiet as a ghost, recording everything. At one point, the captain sent a single ping, just a light tap, to let the Russians know he'd been there the whole time. By day 2, the P-8 crews began timing their pings to ruin the Russians' REM sleep. Ping, just as they drifted off. Ping, over and over. After 48 hours, those sailors were probably hallucinating colors that scientists haven't discovered yet. The Russians finally tried running. They did everything: terrain tricks, radical depth changes, full sprints, decoys, but NATO countered each move instantly. It was like trying to lose the IRS during tax season. The Russians aborted the mission, pretended it was successful, and headed home. And NATO followed like bouncers escorting someone out of a club, just to make sure they actually left. During those 48 hours, NATO collected so much acoustic intelligence that they could probably identify those subs from space. Every valve, every pump, even their toilet flushes are now in NATO's database. Russia called the mission a success. Sure, just like the Titanic successfully tested ice detection. By the end, one lesson was crystal clear. You can build the fanciest submarines on Earth, but if you can't handle 2 days of democracy screaming in your ears through active sonar, maybe the deep end isn't for you.